So hello, good to be here. And today we're going to draw the awesome Stan. I promised a beard, but then when I started looking, I found this picture. So I'm going to switch to my camera. I found this picture and just thought he was fabulous. I mean, who could resist drawing that face? So we're going to draw him today. And yeah, so I've on my paper here, just before we started, I've just drawn an oval. Just because his face is slightly, if you look, it's slightly, we're seeing more of this side of his face than the other. So if I draw one around his face, you can see that the line, I draw a line through his nose, a slightly curved line to show the middle of the face. And I've put it here on this one, because that just helps to get if you look at your picture, you can draw on it and just look at where that line is. I don't know how well that shows up, but I don't want to go right over it because then I won't be able to see him. But yeah, you can just draw a line, which kind of tells you, basically, I try and draw a line that goes down the middle of the forehead here and through the nose, through the middle of the mouth and the chin. And that will give you the angle when you're drawing on your paper. So I've got that. And I'll give myself a line for the eyes, which is not quite halfway down his head because of the way the picture's been taken. So then I know where to start. So this eye here almost sits on that center line. So I just start with that eye. And so I'm just using a pencil and just trying to draw in the shape of the eye. And there's his pupil. When we're thinking about the direction that someone's looking, I mean, he's obviously looking straight to camera, even though his face is tilted. It's about how you place the eye, and I get it wrong as often as I get it right. So I find often the highlight that you put in at the end will make it point in the right direction. So at this point, it's just about trying to get the shape of the eye and kind of the negative space here around which shows the white of the eye. If you can get that right, then you can more or less get the shape of the eye right. I did try not drawing the bottom of the eye for a while, because I know lots of people say that you don't need to draw it. But I find if I don't draw it, I struggle a bit with my drawing, with placing the other parts of the eye. So I tend to just draw it in, but not too heavily. So now I've got the eyes. I think this eye is too open. It needs to be a bit more closed. And then we've got the eyelid. So he has an eyelid here, but then you can also see the shape of his eye socket here, which his eyebrows sit on top of. So I will often add in that second line because it helps. And then you know where to place his eyebrows because they're pretty much above that line. And that takes me down to the nose. So when I'm drawing, I'm kind of connecting the features. So I've done the eye, I've connected this bit. And I quite often will make it continuous line when I'm using a pencil. I can separate them out afterwards. But if you use a continuous line or a very scruffy line, then it kind of helps to keep everything connected and keep them in the same place. So his face is slightly tipped. So this nostril is lower than that nostril. And you can see that there. You can see that angle. So it needs to be lower on this side. So then I'm going to come and do the other eye. So an eyelid. And then we have this kind of shadow shape here. And then you can see that kind of off here sits his eyebrows again. He has great eyebrows. He has really good hair. Great hair to draw. So, and when I'm looking at where the end of the eyebrow is, I'm kind of, yeah, in my head, I'm drawing a line between the edge of the eyebrow and the corner of his eye. If any of you've ever I have a friend who's a beautician who once showed me that that's exactly how they figure out if they're doing your eyebrows. It's how they figure out where to make the end of the eyebrows. You just put the tweezers like that. So I use what I learned from her for doing that. So then we have these awesome lines under his eye. And these lines are quite big, quite dark. And I think it really helps to put them in because they add so much character to his face. So off his nose here, he's got this line. Then he has a line coming down a bit like that. And then we have the line of his moustache. So those lines will all help us draw the side of his face. So I never draw the side of the face first, always draw it last. Because I know if I draw it first, I'll get it wrong, because I always do. I need the features to guide me as to where the side of his face is. So long experience tells me that I won't get it right. So he has this great lip as well. I remember once doing a class where they said that the lips are two W's with an M in the middle, and he's got this perfect W here. It's like a really curvy W, which helps. So now I've got his features. I'm just checking whether they're in the right place, and I think that they are. So now I've got that. I'll draw in the side of his face. So it's pretty straight down here. There aren't many angles, so you can kind of just do a line straight down until around. You look, this is straight down until around here where it just starts to move in slightly. So actually it might help if I draw the curve of his chin, because then I'll see where that sits. So I think it sits around there. And we can adjust this. If we do it now and then it doesn't look right, we're not using pen at this point, so it's easily adjustable. Okay, so now I want his ear, and I drew this line here, and that is pretty much on top of his ear. And the bottom of his ear is level with the center of his mouth. So the bottom of his ear is going to be around there. Now I'm just drawing the top of his ear, and then this kind of Y shape in the middle. I did at one point know the names of all these parts of the ears, but I don't know them anymore. I've forgotten, but I think that's about right. And then we need hair. So if I come up to the top of his head, so I know I say this every time, I'm going to say it again, hair is a shape. So draw in the shapes that you can see. It's the easiest way of getting the hair right, rather than just drawing lines, which people often do when they're learning right at the beginning. You'll find people just do lines, so the hair looks like spaghetti. So draw the shape. And if you think about cartoons don't usually have lines. They have a shape, and they'll often just have, cartoons will just have a single hair shape on the top of a head, but you know it's hair. It's very identifiable. So, I mean, I try and cut it up into shapes. So like here, we have this shape here and that shape. So again, you can draw over, make two photos and draw over one of them if it helps you to identify the shapes. And his hair comes right down, which makes me think I've probably drawn, I think I've drawn his face too tall. I think I definitely have, looking at the hair now. So I might have to move his hair down a bit. But then if I put these lines in, maybe I do need to move it down a little bit, because this shape here looks too big. So I'm going to move it down. So it gets really scruffy at this point if I start switching things about, and I have to try and remember which lines are which. But it does help. It's kind of important to do it. If you notice that you've made a mistake at this point, it's more important to kind of go with what you know is wrong. Just adjust it than to try carry on drawing. Because if you carry on drawing and everything is wrong, it's much harder to place both the color and the lines and the color in the right place. So, I mean, I don't always notice. Sometimes I'm halfway through a portrait and I realize that I've done something really wrong. And then I just have to go with it. But if you can see that something isn't quite right, then I would adjust it. So I've just done his hair too high, I think. So that's the framework for what I'm going to go on and draw. And at this stage, you've got a face with lots of nice lines and features like this one. It's worth drawing them in because obviously the more you draw them in, the more anchors you've got to see if everything is right. So I'm now looking, just trying to figure out if everything's in the right place. And I think it more or less is. But by adding in lines like this one here and this one here, it helps you to see, because you can look at the features around it and just try and figure out. I think his chin is too big as well, isn't it? Although I often think that, and then I adjust them and make them much too short. So maybe I'll stick with it. If I had lots of time and wanted to get it really accurate, then I would just measure. But since we don't have infinite time, I'm not going to measure. I'm just going to go with it. I think it looks reasonably like him. I can see where I've gone wrong here now. See, I've just looked and I've got this very big space between the eye and the side of his face. And on the image, it's much smaller. So I have drawn this side of his face too wide. And I can see that clearly by looking at these shapes here. So I'm going to bring the side of his face in, and this is therefore all wrong. So I'm going to try and correct as I draw now. So I'm going to start with the eye. So I've got a 0.5mm Unipin. This is a dark grey one. You can use black, you can use any fine liner. I just happen to like these ones. You can buy these in boxes of 12, so if you like them, I recommend. It costs a lot less. I buy them in very big boxes. I have a whole drawer full. But I never have to worry about running out of ink because I've got plenty more. So I'm drawing these lines in around his head. And we'll draw in a line for the eyebrow. So at this point, I think I probably need to do the nose just to help me figure out the side of the face. And my lines are really wonky today. I had a fall this morning and hurt my elbows, my hand. So I have got slightly wonky lines, but that just adds to the character of the drawing. We won't worry about it. So, and this is his moustache. And I don't worry too much about defining the shape of the moustache because it's white. And I know at the end, I'll probably do it in quite a dark color maybe. And then at the end, go over it with color pencil. So these lines, if they turn out to be slightly the wrong shape, we can just go over them. Not a problem. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. So this eye, I think I've drawn it slightly low. It needs to be a little bit higher. So I'm just going to lift it up a little bit. Oh, very wonky circle there. Good job he's got dark eyes, and we can go over my very dodgy lines. So, and then we have this kind of shape of his eye socket. I mean, you can see his whole eye socket here. It's kind of this whole space here that's shaded. And I love it when I see a photo that has really good shadow around that eye socket, because it just makes it so much easier to get the shape, to get everything right, really. Because you have these great guiding lines. So it's quite hard to see where his eyebrow ends on this. If I'm drawing at home, I'll usually use a picture on my iPad, because the light shining through makes all these features really obvious. So yeah, I would definitely say if you have an iPad and you're not using it to draw right now, then it really helps to have your picture full size on your iPad. And that's definitely what I always do. I would never print out a picture if I wasn't in class. I print it out in class so that I can draw on it and show you things. And the iPad doesn't, the iPad reflects really badly under this camera and light. So for me, it makes sense to use a printed out picture, but I generally wouldn't. So I'm going to try and draw the side of his face. I've got so many lines there, it's quite hard to figure out which is which, but I can just look at the picture. I don't need to use the lines I've drawn. But obviously, if you're doing this, you can take the time and erase the lines that you don't want and add in the ones that you do. I take quite a few shortcuts in class just so that we can try and finish a whole picture. But if you're doing it yourself, outside of class, you don't need to take those shortcuts. And I can see that his neck here is in the wrong place. It needs to be a little bit further over, maybe there. So I'll draw his ear before I do the other side of his neck. And every ear is different. But at the end of the day, no one is going to sit and kind of analyze how you've drawn an ear. So my advice is to keep it simple. Just draw the main shapes that you can see. And we have this like Y shape in here. Then the neck. And I can see that I've drawn his earlobe too big, but it doesn't matter. I'm not aiming for photorealism. I'm just aiming for a picture that kind of captures him and how he looks. So, I might draw some of these lines under his neck. Normally I wouldn't, I just use them. I just draw in the shadow, but if I add lines in, it will help when I'm drawing it. But I think I only need 2 lines to kind of tell me where those shadows are. And then we're coming to the hair. And I think I'm going to start in the middle because I did draw it wrong and I've got so many lines there. It's probably easiest to just start in the middle here. And then I know kind of how tall I want it. So this hair over here. So I'm just drawing the broad shapes of his hair. So there is another little bit, isn't there, that comes down here a bit. And then this goes this way. So I'm just picking up some of the biggest shapes I can see in his hair. Yeah, this bit here. I think I've probably made that go too low, so I might lift it up a bit. And then we've got the bit of hair around his ear there. And then I just need to add some shape to the back of this. Okay. It's probably hard for you to see exactly what I've got because I've got so much pencil. So I'm just going to get rid of that and then you can see what's left. It takes a little while because there's a lot of pencil on my page. But I'll get there. And I always think that time spent erasing isn't time wasted. Because while you're doing it, you're kind of looking at what you've drawn. And it's just another minute or 2 spent getting to know the face. And I have an outline that I think looks pretty much like him. Quite pleased with how much like him it looks at this point. That probably means I'll lose the likeness when I'm adding colour. Because usually if I start with a good likeness, I'll lose it. Whereas if I don't have such a good likeness, quite often I can find it along the way. but I think it's quite like him. I'm just going to brush on my bits of erasing on, and that's what I've left. So, and I can see that this line didn't fully take at the bottom here. So I'm just going to add that back in. Maybe I didn't draw it. And I'm going to add some texture. Again, if I was drawing outside of class, I'd probably draw all the lines on his jumper all the way down here, because I quite like doing that. But I'm not going to do that today because I don't want to waste 5 or 10 minutes of class time just drawing lines. But I do like to add a little bit of the clothes, just to say this isn't a floating head. I don't like floating head drawings, basically. So this kind of says this isn't a floating head. This is a person. He's wearing clothes. It's just I'm not drawing them all. So, and if he had very dark hair, I might I would probably draw in some lines on his beard as mustache as well, but I'm not going to. So I have an outline, and then I'm gonna work on it with my Copics. And I thought I'd just explain what I have for cleaning up when you have accidents with Copics, which we do. If you've watched these classes before, you know that my Copics leak quite a lot anyway. But also when I'm filling them, I'll quite often spill Copics, and water won't clean it up. So if you get alcohol on the outside of your marker here, and you try and clean it up with water, so say you're filling a marker and you spill some, water won't remove it. You need alcohol. So these hand sanitizers that we all used during the pandemic are perfect. One of them will last a long time, but I will just, so if I have a spill, I'll squeeze it usually on some kitchen towel and then just wipe off my pencil. But definitely you need some alcohol. I've got some liquid as well somewhere. So either, liquid that you can buy either online or at a chemist, or I like the hand gel better than liquid because obviously it's not so runny. But the other thing I also have here is some of these little alcohol swabs, which again, you can buy for very little. And these are better if you want to be quite precise in what you're cleaning up. So if you have a spill and you don't want to be using lots of gel on a tissue, these are great for, I have injections, so I inject myself. So I always have some of these anyway, and they don't cost very much. And they're perfect for really small spills where you need to be quite precise. So, but basically you just need some kind of cleaner with alcohol in it. But I mean, I've had this one, you can see here, so long it's rubbed off. I've had it for probably since the pandemic. So it lasts a long time. You don't need much, but definitely if you're going to be working with Copics regularly, I really recommend getting something with alcohol in it for cleaning up. So I'm going to start with, because often I find as well that the lids inside, I don't know if you can, let me try and get that in focus. Oh, it's not going to sound too close. Well, you can see from there anyway. The insides of my lids get really dirty. There we are. They get really dirty, especially if it with a dark color. And those little swabs are great for getting inside there and cleaning them out, which I do every so often, because they get quite sticky if you don't. Sometimes this one has a little, like a sticky line on it. And yeah, you need to clean them up. If you're going to be using them for a long time and refilling them, you do have to take some time just cleaning them up in between. So this is the color. This is E70, which is Copic Ash Rose. And I always have a little pad here to test my colors. So before I use them, even though I know them really well, I always test them again just to make sure, because sometimes I might have pulled out the wrong one by mistake. So I generally test them to make sure that I've got the right colors. So I like using the chisel tip. So I'm going to chisel everywhere where I can see shadow in this picture. So, or quite dark shadow, not just any shadow. So he has this quite dark shadow, which goes across his brow like that, and then comes down here. You can see it kind of comes down here and then comes up into his eyebrow. So it goes kind of like that. And this first run through of kind of marking in the shadows is doing just that. I'm just marking, I'm kind of showing myself, telling myself where the shadows are before I start, so that when I start properly, I know where should be darkest on his face. And this colour more or less disappears as you work. As we work over it, it will just merge into the colours above. So you won't get these kind of quite dark shadow lines that we've got right now. So my drawing on his nose is really wonky. But by the end, no one will look at the wonky lines. They'll look at the overall picture. So don't worry if you have wonky lines. I always have lots of them, which if you actually stopped and examined my drawings, you'd see them. But people tend not to notice. It's because you know they're there, so you kind of fixate on them a bit. But we just keep drawing. It's just a drawing. So he also has quite dark shadow under his lip here. And around this kind of, this circle of his chin. I love it when someone actually has a very definable circle of the chin, because I tend to draw them in. But in his case, I mean, it's there. So I'm going to make this shadow a little bit broken up, because his is. So I'm just really making little sort of dabbing marks to break it up a bit. And then we have this great dark shadow down here, which, I mean, you can just draw the outline of it like this and fill it in if it's easier. So it's just a shape like that under here. And then here as well. And then there's always shadow in here. There are parts, draw enough portraits, and there are some areas where you don't really need to look to draw. I can see here that I've drawn his ear completely wrong. So I'm actually going to correct that, because I don't like how wrong it is. His ear should come out much more. So I'm going to correct it. I would rather have it corrected like that. So this is what I mean by I don't worry if I end up adding extra lines to correct things. You can either leave it as it is, or you can draw in the lines and correct it. No one will notice those lines by the time we're finished, I promise. So the only other place where we kind of maybe need a bit of this is on these lines on his brow. Just because otherwise, if I don't put these in here, I'll probably forget about them. And there is more shadow on his nose, but I'm trying to just do the darkest. And again, here there is, but we'll draw that in with grey in a little while. So for now, I think we've got most of the shadow. So then I'm going to go to my E00, which is Cotton Pearl, which if I show you the colour, it's the colour I often use for white skin. And I'm going to basically cover his face except where the highlights are. So there's one here, there's one here, there's a little one there. But again, if you've got a drawing that you've been drawing shapes on, you can just draw your shapes on like this. And then you'll know what you're going for and where. And there are little bits of highlight up here. So, and on the ear, there, and there. So it can help to draw them in if you need to. So again, I'm going to use my chisel tip. So I'm looking at this and I'm adding this color here, and I'm already wondering whether color pencil will actually show for his hair, which I'll use for his hair, whether it'll actually show over this color. It might not, but at the moment I'm going to try it, see, because I find that you need quite dark colors for color pencils to show up well. And don't worry if you miss highlights here either, because you can add highlights back in with, I didn't erase very well there, so I've got a mark, but that'll be covered by the hair when I come to add pencils. So it's quite hard because the highlights are quite small on his brow. It's quite hard to preserve them with Copics, because once you've drawn, the ink will still feather out a little bit. But if that happens, we can draw them back in with colour pencils, so don't worry about it. Again, anything that doesn't work exactly the way you want it to, just don't worry, because we're building up a picture, and we can use other Copics, and we can use colour pencils to build up the colour that we need. And so long as the colour is, actually it doesn't matter, I was going to say so long as the colour is darker than the one you're using, it'll show up. But also if it's lighter, it can be harder to get them to show up if they're lighter, but they will. So he kind of has a highlight on his eye there as well, so I'm not going to cover the whole eye. And there, I'm going to leave that as well. So I'm adding a few more highlights as I'm going. I can see other areas where his skin is lighter than this colour, so I don't really want to use this colour. I should have said before we started, make sure you have, if you're not using marker paper, make sure you have some scrap paper underneath your page so you don't mark the next page. Because if you're just using Copics and you haven't got anything under your page, you'll see it bleeds through, and it would mark the next page. It's very slightly on bleeding through onto that, which is fine. But when we start using dark colours like brown, it will really show through. Actually, I don't think we have any brown, but I forgot to get brown out for his eyes again. So we'll have to do his eyes with colour pencil. So that there is, most of this is quite dark. So here we're just making judgments. It's like our own judgments. So but I know I want some lighter colour there. So I'm kind of trying to draw the shapes I see, but not fussing too much about them. So you don't have to make the same judgments as me. It's fine for you to, you know, if you see highlights differently, that's fine. The other thing with Copics, when you're doing something like this, is you have to work quite quick, because we're carving out areas of highlight. You have to work quite quickly not to get lines. See, I've got a little line there, because as soon as the alcohol starts to dry, it will, now I've got one there, because that part is dry, we get this little line forming. Not the end of the world, there are ways around it, but there are ways of dealing with it. But people often say to me, why don't your pictures come out stripy? And it's often because I've refilled my pens before every class, so they're really wet. Although this one is drying up, and I did refill it this morning. So let me just go to his notes, figure out what needs doing here. Trying to see if I can draw in that shape, which I think is like that. And then we can go around it. There's almost always a highlight on the nose somewhere. I mean, usually there's highlights on the forehead, sometimes on the eyes. The highlight here is quite small, it's sort of there. On the cheeks. I can just see that I've drawn over the highlight. Can you see I marked a highlight out there and I've drawn over it. So I'll have to put that one in with colour pencils, and that's fine, I could do that. That's why it can help to draw the lines for the highlights before you start, because then you'll remember them. So the ear. So I recommend working quite quickly, but in between, once you've laid down a layer of colour, stopping and just taking the time to look at what you've done, so that you can see where, you know, if there are things that are slightly wrong or not quite the way you want them, if you take time out to just look, you'll see that. And then you can do whatever you need to do to fix it. And by fixing it, oh, this end has gone dry. I need to use my other end. That's the wet end. Ink always flows to one or other end. So if you have a dry end, it's always worth tipping it over and trying the other end, because the ink is, yeah, my other end, the brush end is really wet. Because you should find that your other end is quite wet. You're supposed to store them horizontally. And I do, mine were horizontal, but I still find the ink goes more to one end than the other. Okay. So I think we're finished with that one. So then we have this lighter one, which the one I've picked out is E with 4 zeros, but you can use E with 3 zeros as well. They're really similar. So it doesn't really matter which one you use. So you can see it's just quite a lot lighter than the colour we've just used. And I'll put that over everything at this point, except the eyes and the hair. So I go on top of the colour I've already drawn, because it helps the two colours to merge in if you're going on top rather than just filling in. You can just fill in your highlights, but it will look like that's what you've done. Whereas if you do it this way, the colours kind of merge in together better, I think. Obviously, if you're running out of ink, then just fill in the highlights, not all of it. But I hope you can see that the colours kind of merge together when you do it like this. And already now we've added colour, those lines there where I extended his ear, you don't really notice them unless you're looking for them. So don't start all over again. Work on the drawing you've done. Fix your lines if you want to. And just keep going, and you figure out ways of making them just not really, it's not that they're not there, of course they're there, but they're just not noticeable. So actually, I'm going to put some of this on his lip as well. So now we've done that, we can start adding some of the other skin tones. So I think I'm going to start with the greys, which are the shadows, and then we can add like pink and blue and yellow. So I've got 2 greys. I have a cool grey 3, which is that one, and a cool grey 1, which is just a lot paler. You just need 2 greys really to kind of distinguish between darker shadows and lighter ones. You don't have to use cool greys. You can use, so the cool greys are quite blue. The warm greys, if I show you, I'll show you this one. The warm greys are quite brown. So it's just a much browner sort of grey, quite a lot darker as well. But there are neutral greys, toner greys. That's it, neutral, toner, yeah, warm and cold. So there are 4 different types of grey. And I mostly use the cool ones. So if you're just going to get 2, then I would get 2 cool ones and lighter ones rather than darker ones, because you can build up, you can draw layer upon layer to get them darker. So actually I'm going to use the other end. So if you look at your Copic, where this one end of it has a grey band around the body of the pen, that's telling you that's the brush end. There are little symbols on them that tell you that's the brush end and that's the chisel, but that grey band is what tells you that which end is which. So that's your brush, but I'm going to use the chisel. And my greys are always really leaky, so that one doesn't feel too bad. So especially at the chisel end, they leak a lot. So I'm just coming in and going over this shadow here. I'm going to draw this over his eyebrows. It will draw his eyebrows in with pencils later, but it's always easier to do that if you have quite a dark colour to start with. So that's why I'm doing them with this darker colour, because then the white hairs will show up better. So, and I'm going to draw in the shadow here with this. And I know I've got a lighter colour to go, so I'm drawing in the darkest shadows, knowing that I'm going to go over it and pull out the lighter shadows in a moment. So this one here, definitely. And under there. Just going to look at his brow. So I'm going to draw this one in. And this one in. Although the colour up there is quite pink, but we can adjust this and make this line pinker with pencils. There's also a line here that I hadn't drawn in, so I'm just going to add it. And then I'm just going to do the very bottom of the shadows here. There. So you can use the chisel, turn the chisel end over and just use kind of the point of it, the pointed edge at the top, to fill in some dark spaces. So there is a dark shadow across the bottom of his nose, and then it will get lighter. So we'll do the lighter in a moment. And then here, there is a little shadow here. So I'm going to put that in. There's some shadow here. So it's most of the places where we've already done that kind of pink grey, but not all of them. And the other place I'm going to put it is across what would be the centre of his lip. And also, if you look here, there's this shadow on his lip. So I'm going to draw that in. It really helps with when you're drawing lips to give them a kind of, to make them three-dimensional. And the easiest way to do that is to draw in the shadows. So, I mean, we can add more if we need to in a little bit. Yeah, I don't think I've done his moustache far enough down here now. But I can fix that. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. So then we're going to come down here. And I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier, which is just kind of almost scribbling some little marks to kind of give a sense of that sort of very dimpled chin that he's got. Then we have this really great shadow underneath his chin. I love shadows. I think they will give everything sort of dimension and interest. So I will spend a long time on them because I really like them. And if you look at them, there are all kinds of different colours around the edges. I find it easiest to get those different colours with pencils rather than with Copics, but there's all kinds of sort of pink and orange. Interesting. So down here, there's lots of pink and orange on this side. I need his ear. There's usually a little shadow underneath the ear, obviously cast by the light. So it's the shadow of the earlobe, basically. See, now I made this correction here. This is actually much easier for me to draw. I would have been drawing from my imagination earlier because it was just totally the wrong shape. Whereas now I can actually draw what I can see. I think that's all the dark shadow. And then I'm going to use the lighter color, which is C1, and we're going to go over the areas with dark shadow, but then sort of take them out a little bit to where there's a lighter shadow. So the whole of this part of his face is under shadow. So, and hair usually, if someone's having a photo taken, there's usually quite a strong light, and hair will often cast the shadow. I think in his case, the whole of his forehead is quite darkly shadowed, but I don't really want to make it all grey, so I'm not going to. But I am going to put shadow under here so that we can see that this is darker. You can see that it's darker up here than it is, say, down here. We're not trying to draw things exactly as they are. We're trying to give an impression of how something looks. So I'm not doing hyperrealism here, so I'm just trying to give a sense. So here I'm trying to give a sense of these brow lines, but I'm not pretending to be drawing them exactly accurately. So I think the shadow here pretty much from the side of his eye all the way out. So as I'm going, I am drawing over the areas where I did the darker shadow with the lighter color again, just to kind of make the colors blend in so that the shadows look like they're all part of the same thing. Just helps with that blending. So then we have this really interesting shape here where we have this dark shadow. So I'm not going to draw it all. I'm just going to try and follow the curves. I'm also going to add this color to his eyeball because his eyes are completely in shadow. We can't see any white. Well, I certainly can't in the drawing, in the photo I've got here. Possibly if you're looking on an iPad where the colors are much brighter, you might see some white, but in this photo, I can't see any. So, and this shadow goes across about half his eyelid here. Down, same over here. So I'm going to add that in. And there is maybe a little bit here. So this is the bit I really enjoy. I really enjoy just looking. Turning something from kind of something that looks very two-dimensional, which was my line drawing, and making it three-dimensional just by adding in all these shadow shapes. Now, when we're looking at the lips, again, adding a bit more shading in the corners to give them a bit more shape. In a minute, I'm going to put some of this colour in his hair as well. But we'll finish what we're doing first. Again, I'm just trying to draw the shapes that I can see down here. And rather than just drawing lots of kind of wrinkles and lines in the drawing, I kept my line drawing to a minimum, but I then kind of draw them in using shadows instead. So like there's a wrinkle here, but I haven't drawn it in. I can just use the shadow to basically tell people that it's there. So on his neck, again, you know, I haven't drawn in all the lines on his neck, but we can do that with colour. So I'm just kind of trying to give the impression of some of the shadows that are over here too. Oh, I just realised I didn't. Did I? Oh, maybe I did. Yes, I did. I was thinking that I didn't use my lighter skin tone over here, but I did. I can see it if I look carefully. So, oh, I haven't done his ear. I always forget something. And sometimes I'll get to the end and realise that I did a drawing the other day and realised that there was a whole section of someone's hair that I just hadn't coloured in. And I was almost at the end. I had to go back. It was just, yeah, it was the colour of the page and I had just missed it. I'd been so focused on the other things I was doing that I didn't see it. So I'm going to add some of this colour in his hair as well. So I'm just using these kind of sweeping motions. Because I'm going to be going over this with colour pencil. So we're just kind of, I'm literally just using the chisel to create the shapes in his hair. Because his hair is mostly white. But if you're going to add in some streaks of white, some like, what's the word I'm looking for? If you're going to add in some single hairs in white, they need some colour to work against. They just won't show up on this paper. So I will generally make hair a little bit lighter than it needs, a little bit darker, sorry, than it needs to be. Because I know I want to use pencils on top of it. So I'm then kind of relighting it with the pencils. So I suppose this is like the colour of someone's roots. And then, so his beard again, and not his beard, his moustache. It's not a beard, Helen, it's a moustache. I mean, it definitely looks like him. I might go back and add some darker grey as well, because that will help too with adding pencils. Just doing a time check. Yeah, we've got plenty of time. That's good. I should really have done this colour before, because I find that it's better to work over the darker colour with the lighter colour. But I can go back and go over it again. So I'm really just creating a few hairs here. I mean, you don't need very much to give a sense of movement. So we already have a good sense of, you know, the directions that his hairs are going in, his hair is going in. And I'm going to add some darkness here. And then I know I'm going to go over this with white and make it much lighter. So there we are. So because I didn't get a brown for the eyes, I might just use this dark grey for now. And then we'll go over it with brown pencil. I don't like these really vacant iris in the middle of the face. That looks so much better just with some colour. And we'll do that with pencil. So other colours that I need, other colours that I kept out. So those were for his hair. So I have here the E70 I already used. So this one is quite a dark pink. This is the R32, and I just thought I'd use that here in his cheek. So maybe just here. So I'm not going to use very much of it. I'm not going to use it on his lips because I think they're going to look too pink if I do. So here I'm literally, because it's a really bright colour, so I don't want to use too much. I just want a few areas where there's some really dark pink. Here maybe. So I'm just looking for where the darkest pinks are. Mostly we'll use a lighter pink for this. But there are some pretty dark ones up here. And in his ear, we can always put a darker pink. So my lines have almost disappeared now because I've put the darker pink in. And I might put just a little bit of that on the outside of the ear. Or at the bottom. See, we could just use the light pink, but I think it's much more fun to use these much stronger colours. Actually, I'm going to put some on his nose too. But you don't have to. If you feel like it's too much, you can just use the lighter one. So this is the lighter one, which is my favourite. This is my go-to light pink, and it's always a very leaky pen. That's RV00. So they call it, Copic call it water lily. That one always leaks. I might try and use the other end, which is maybe less leaky. So yeah, this is still pretty leaky. Actually, I'm going to use the brush because it's leaky anyway. And with the brush, I can create these kinds of, the reason I use the brush is because you can kind of taper it a little bit around the ends. So, but I'm going to have this go up here and I'm going to have it go around here so that we have some pink. I kind of think you can never have too much pink in a portrait. So, I mean, as long as it's the right kind of pink. Copic make a really candy floss colour pink, and I don't think I've ever used it. I bought it and didn't realise, bought it online, didn't realise just how pink it was going to be. And I don't think I've ever used it. So then we've got his ear has some pink on. So, and again, I'm doing what I always do, which is to go over the darker pinks that I've already put in, because I want the colours to merge into each other. I don't want them to kind of sit separately, which they do a bit unless you go over them both. I think we still need more pink here. I don't think this is right. So I'm just adding a bit more over his nose though. And the thing about doing this is you can always knock this back with pencils. So if you do it and then think, oh no, it really messed it up, I've made it much too pink, it's very easy to knock back these colours a bit with coloured pencil. I mean, I just hatch over them with the darker colour. I might put this on his lip, and then I'm thinking that his lip is probably going to be the pink grey that we used earlier. I'm going to come back to, I'm really liking how this is looking. So always pink on the chin, almost always. In most images you see, you'll see that people have quite pink chins, and usually quite a bit on the neck here. I mean, I could use the darker pink for the top of the neck, but I think it might be a bit too dark. So I'm going over the grey here, all the grey, and then extending the shadows out from the grey because they're pink. So I'm making them pink rather than grey. I love colour, so I'm always just looking for colour. And I couldn't see all the colours in a face when I first started doing this. It takes practice, and also the more you look, the more you'll see. So I'm now seeing that there's pink here as well. Yeah, so definitely the more you look at a face, the more colour you'll see in it. It might come back. I think this needs to be pink too, doesn't it? It comes down a bit into his moustache. Yeah. So I'm going to use the grey pink that we used earlier, which was E70, and just put that on his, it might be, no, I don't think it is too dark actually. I was a bit worried that it was going to be too dark, but I think it's fine. The rest of the colour on his lips we'll use pencils for. So I had this colour, E11, which is kind of a darker skin tone. I should have used this earlier when I did the shadows, but I'm looking now and thinking, yeah, where do I need to use this? Well, I'm going to use it down here on his neck. Basically where there's darker, this is leaking too, because it's a new refill. So some of these shadows on his neck, I'm just going to make them stronger with this darker skin tone, basically. Oh, it's very leaky though. So I'm getting more colour than I anticipated, but that's fine. Again, I'll just knock it back with colour pencils, so it gives me an opportunity to show you how I would do that.
Helen, what color are you using right now?
This one is E11. It's called Barley Beige.
Gotcha. I don't think I have it.
There's an E21 as well that's quite similar. Yeah, that's called Baby Skin Pink, which is just a little bit lighter, but you might have that one. Or,
yes, I do. I have E21.
Yeah, so you can use that. Oh. It's just it's a little bit lighter. It might even be easier to use something because this is quite dark. So yeah, something lighter might work. You can see that the ink is feathering out a bit there and making this I don't know, freckle, age spot, something like that on his cheek go very dark. And that's just something that Copics do. While the paper's wet, they will spread out. I'm going to come in here and just use this on the shadows on his brow here. And I might use just a little bit here going into, because I'm guessing that he had brown hair. So he has quite dark eyebrows. Actually, we could use this on the eyes as well. There I was saying I didn't have a brow, but this on top of grey creates a light brown. Perfect. And then I'm just wondering if I need some. I think I probably do need some on the chin. So I'm looking at where I've got the chin, the nose, sorry. I'm looking for where I've got the darkest shadows and just making them a bit darker with that colour. So it's kind of a beigey, it's a beigey pink. Did I show you? Yes, I did show you how it looked. So then we just need some blue and yellow on the skin. I didn't bring out a yellow, so I obviously could. Now, why did I not do that? Should have yellow. I'm going to get a yellow anyway. I'm going to do some blue, and then I have two colours for his hair. Add a bit more to his hair. So the first place where I will always put a blue is around the eye, around the iris and the eye, because I think there is often, oh, I have a serious leak now. So you just go straight in there. This is why you always have a tissue beside you. or a Kleenex or some kitchen paper. This is kitchen towel. Because if that happens, you can dab most of it away. And I'm not very worried about the rest. In fact, I can see some blue up here. It's a bit higher up, but this is very leaky. I can see some blue under the edges of the hair here. So we'll add that. And we'll add some here. But don't ever panic if you spill. Incorporate it into your drawing and it'll be fine. So, but do be ready to dab every time you've used your pen. You can also just dab your pen on the paper because it's quite absorbent and it'll take up quite a lot of it. And maybe a little bit around the edge here. I don't want very much. That's probably as much. Maybe a bit high. No, that's probably as much as I need anyway. Except I haven't put any in this eye, so I'm going to put some in that eye too. So I didn't get a yellow out, and I don't know if I added one to my list or not, but I am going to use a little bit of yellow because he does have some. So I'm just stretching over to pull out. Don't mind everything being in the way. There we go. So I pulled the yellow out. This one is, yeah, I have two really light ones. So I have, let me show you if I can without dropping everything. So there are two light, I've only got two light yellows in my collection. So this one is a yellow green with 4 zeros. It's called Lily White. And it is a greeny yellow. And this one is barium yellow, which is Y00. And this one is, I'll at the right end. It's a bit more yellow. So, but there's very little difference between them. So if you want to get one, those are the lightest ones I've been able to find. And I do like a really light yellow. Those are the lightest I've found. And I don't think there's very much difference between them. So again, as with so many Copics, I kind of think they're interchangeable. This one is a traditional square Copic, which I don't have that many. And you don't often see them anymore. But they're square Copics, so they have the chisel end, but they don't have the brush end. They have this tiny little pointed end, which if I can bring it up, there we are. It's a bit fuzzy, but you can see it's a pointed end, which I almost never use. So that's why I tend not to buy them. They take lots more ink, so you can get a lot of ink in them because the barrel is so big. But I would rather have a brush tip and a chisel tip. So I'm just going to put a bit of yellow in his face. Again, if you find this too much, you can just add it with colour pencil where it won't be so vibrant. I really love adding yellow. I think it gives so much life to someone's face. So I just look for where I can see yellow in the picture, in the photo, and then just add it. So I think there's quite a lot here as well, down on his neck. And, you know, to me, it's a bit like if you were painting with a fat paintbrush, you wouldn't worry about getting it in exactly the right place. It's about giving the sense of what we're doing. Very often it's around the highlights. So if you're looking for it, it's very often where the highlights are. So, and I really like what it does. So once I've done the whole face, and I think that's all the colour we're going to put on the face, we're going to come back to it later with colour pencil. Then I go back to the first colour, the lightest colour I used on the skin, which in this case was my E with 4 zeros. And I just go over everything. Obviously not the eyes, not the hair, because I'm going to do those in a moment, but I'm going to go over the whole face except the eyes with this. And I do this mainly because, again, it helps the colours to merge down. If you have any stripes and you want rid of them, doing this with quite a wet Copic is a good way of getting rid of those stripes. I'm not being at all careful.
Sorry, Helen, I missed which one that was again.
It's the E with 4 zeros, but you could use the E with 3 zeros. Whatever the lightest skin tone was that you used.
Okay.
And we're just going to go over everything. And it will tone down the yellow as well a little bit because we're adding kind of a pale skin tone on top of it. I love how this portrait looks right now. It's one of my favorites. I do think it's much easier to draw older faces. that have a lot of interest in them, a lot of line, a lot of character. It's much easier to get a likeness. So now I'm just going to have a go at the hair, and then we'll switch to colour pencils. So I pulled out these two colours, but any kind of beigey white would be fine. These ones, the ones I've got are E41 and E40. So that's E41, and it's kind of a brown. I know his hair is white, but it's quite a yellowy white, and I wanted to use this so that I can then use colour pencils on top. So I would automatically go for colours that are a little bit darker. And this one is E40, which is called brick white. So that's more of a beigey grey. So that will be for the lighter parts of his hair. So I'm going to use the darker one. I'm going to use the chisel end to be quick and not too fussy. And I've already got a leak. This is what happens when you refill your pens before class. I should use them for a bit first. It's really leaky, this one. And I don't think I've ever refilled this one before because I had to open a new ink. So I think this is the first time that I've ever refilled it. So it's very annoying that it's so leaky, but I'm going to just use it where there's, I mean, let it leak if that happens, and then just spread the ink about a bit. So I'm just doing the same as I did before, really, just some brushy strokes in the direction that we think we need them. And if you lift it up as you do the strokes, you get a kind of pointed end. It just takes a bit of practice. So that's enough of that one. And then I've got the lighter one, which is E40. So I'm going to do the same with that. I will leave a few bits. I'll preserve the white of the paper. Well, my paper's slightly cream anyway, but I will leave the paper there in a few places. So that's the hair. And now we're going to finish off the hair with pencils. Where did I put my pencils? Here they are. So I'm going to start with the eyes and the hair, because I think, given the time we have left, those are the things that need the most work. So I'm just going to move my picture so I can put my pencils here. So I'm going to start with the eyes first, because they need to be brown. So I'm just pulling out, they're quite dark, aren't they? Because they're quite in shadow. So this is kind of a medium brown. And I'll just hatch in from the edge. So I'm just going round in a circle, really. Then I'll use another colour. So I'm going to put some black in the middle, first of all. So we have, although we can't really see a pupil in that picture, there is one. So I would always rather draw this in with pencil, because if you get it wrong and he's looking completely the opposite direction, you can easily erase it and do it again. So I'm always going for whatever will work the best. So I've got this darker brown here now, really dark. Brune Foncé, it says. I don't know what that means. What colour? Maybe just dark brown. It's in French. I can't see the English. Although he doesn't have a highlight, I will always add a highlight, but I'll do that at the end. So I'm not sure yet whether I want to give him full-on eyelashes. So for now, I'm just going to draw a dark line around the top of his eyes. Sometimes that's enough. And it might be for him. We'll see. Then I want to do his hair. So for his hair, I'm going to use, so if you've got Prismacolors, they have these really nice sort of French grey, and I'm just looking for, which one's this? Yeah, 70% French grey, and then there should be a lighter one. And they're just slightly brown greys, yeah, 50%, there we are. And then this must be the lightest, she says, hopefully. No? Yeah, 20%. So I really like these. Oh, those two are French grey. This one is cool grey. I don't think I have the lightest French grey. So, or is that it? I should have sorted these out earlier. but I didn't. So I'm going to start with this. So this is the 70% French grey, which is a Prismacolor pencil. But you can just use a dark grey or a dark browny colour. And I'm not going to do masses on his hair, but I am just going to add a bit of, add edges to it really at the top and at the bottom. So just emphasising that the direction that his hair is going in. If I had time, I would spend a long time doing this. So I will probably add some more after class, but we don't have masses of time. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what I will do. So do that a little bit on his hair. Definitely with this darkest one, I'm going to draw in his eyebrows. I might use lighter colours as well on top of it. And I literally just draw, it's like hatching, but I'm following the direction of his eyebrows. So going straight up here and then being more slopey and then sloping down over here. And I find that works fine. And then we'll add a little bit of dark to his moustache as well. Moustache, I don't know. Different pronunciations. I'm never sure how to pronounce it. Moustache, don't know. I say the word and it just sounds wrong. So then I'm going to go for the 50% French grey. I'm going to do this first since I was doing it. So you can do the minimum that you want, or you can spend a long time adding lots if you want to add lots. It just depends on how interesting you find drawing hair. I quite like doing it these days. I didn't used to, I used to hate it. I used to try and only draw bald people, but now I know. Now I've kind of worked out a method for doing it. I just struggled a lot with it, which is why I didn't like doing it. I've made him look like he's got much darker hair than he really has at the moment. So I'm going to bring in some of this very pale colour. And also I've got some white, but the Prismacolor white I find isn't very good. So I have some other brands. I'll show you, look, how I have bought and tried. These are obviously the kind of flesh tones, and these are whites. They're all different brands. To try and find one that I think works really well. And I'm not sure I've ever found one. So this is a very pale grey. But this one is the cool grey. 20% cool, yeah, 20% cool grey. So, and when I'm doing hair around the face, I like to go over the edges of my lines. Because our hair doesn't, although we drew the shapes, hair doesn't sit neatly in those shapes. So it's nice to have some hair coming off around the edges. Now, I don't know if my white is going to work here or not. Oh, it is showing up, yeah. Oh, I've broken the nib. Sometimes I find that it really doesn't show up at all. You probably can't see it, but I can see like there where his hair is quite dark. It definitely shows up a bit. But I'm not sure it's showing up at all over here. So I might just give up the ghost on that one. Yeah, I'm not sure that's working, but I'm happy with the hair. It looks fine. So I did the eyes. I'm going to go into some of the shadows and make them darker. So I'm just going to put these away so I know I've finished with them. So for the shadows, I will always use this indigo. That one's black, you can know indigo. So I go through so many of these indigo pencils. So I'm just going to highlight again. I'll just make some of the lines that I think are important obvious. So especially those ones on his eyelids. And then I'm just going to come in and darken. So places I might just darken that line there as well. But places where there's a lot of shadow. So in this case, it's going to be on the end of the nose. So, and I'm going to redraw that because my kind of line has disappeared. So I'm redrawing the line for the end of the nose. And then I just hatch. So again, here in this nostril, it needs to be dark. It needs to be darker than it is at the moment. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow over the eyes. So that's just a little hatch line. And then here, where it's quite dark, I'm just going to hatch a bit stronger. And I'm going to hatch around these shadows as well under his eye. So, and I'll draw in and make the line stronger if I think they need it. So I'm not really bothered about. I mean, I just want to make, I want to make some bits really draw the eye. But I think if you're going to hatch like this, you do have to sort of try and be balanced, because otherwise it can look, if you only have a tiny bit, it can look really odd. So I tend to do it sort of pretty much everywhere where I've got dark shadows. So definitely under his lip here, but I'll also do it on the lips because his lips are quite dark down there. So I'm just going to add that bit of shadow. If you do it, if you hatch and then you think, oh, I don't like that, it's too strong, the first thing I do, if I think I've done it and it's too dark, is I use an eraser and I erase a little bit away. So you can lighten it like this, just gently. You can keep going and remove all of it. But I would, if you're not sure, just erase a little bit and see how it looks, because you probably don't need to erase all of it. You can just lighten it in places if it's a bit too strong. So, and I like to hatch, so I quite often will add it and it's sometimes a bit too much, but I just knock it back a bit. So here I had a blue leak around his eye. You can hardly see it now, even though it was quite a lot of blue that leaked. But if you want to take that back, then you just go for a pencil that is kind of a similar color to the one you had where you had the leak. And I, again, would just either just hatch or just shade over it. And that will just remove it a little bit more. And I quite like to use this as well. And sometimes if you've drawn a line that's a bit too dark, you can just hatch over it. I think I need to do that shadow there so it matches the one on the other side. So thinking about balance, I don't feel like this one is very balanced. So I'm just going to add it in. There we are. But anywhere where, so if you say you've done this pig and you think you don't like it, just hatch over the edges of it and it just knocks it back. I mean, you can shade over it completely with this pencil. If you wanted to, you would sort of knock the color back a lot, but I will generally just hatch over the edges. And the same if you don't like the yellow, you can just, if you just hatch over it with a skin tone, it will just it'll just make it a bit more like regular skin. It just knocks the color back. Obviously, I'm just doing it very lightly, but you can keep going. You can make it as dark as you want. So down here, where his neck tone is at the moment very green, if you add this to it, it becomes less green and it becomes more skin tone like. So you can just keep knocking. You can do that with all your pencils, just keep knocking the color back again and again. So we don't have long left. So I'm gonna resolve his eyelashes. And I think what I'm going to do is try and draw some in with a medium brown rather than a really dark brown. It's always tricky sometimes with men's eyelashes because you can make them look really effeminate while not wanting to do that. So I don't usually add any in the bottom. That looks fine. So if I'm going to do anything, I'll just kind of put a little bit of brown around the bottom like this. So where with the women, I would almost always draw in eyelashes, especially when it, obviously if someone's got eye makeup on and they're quite strong. But in this case, I'm not going to make them too long. I think I have made it a bit long there. So just knock it back. So I find Prismas are really easy to erase. So I still think his eyebrows need to be a bit darker. But that's one of the reasons why I like using Prismacolors over my Copic drawings, because I think they're really easy to remove. But he definitely doesn't have enough white. in his beard yet. And I'm just going to try one of the others and see if that will work. These are basically all ones that other people have. Yeah, that definitely shows up better. So this is a Stabilo Aquarellable. It says we'll work on paper, glass, plastic, metal. So it's an all surface white. And I think someone recommended this to me. So it does show up a bit more. Not wildly, but a little bit. Yeah, it's still not making that much of a difference. You can see it, but it's not making a dramatic difference. So I'm not sure I would be bothered drawing for a long time with this. I mean, if I really wanted his hair, I think his hair is fine. But if I really wanted it to be white, I'd upload it into Procreate and add white hair there at this point. But what I am going to do before I finish is add. So even when there isn't one in the picture, I'm always going to add a highlight in the eye. I don't like using this over the hair because it looks very much like a gel pen rather than, it doesn't really sit well with the rest of the drawing. So I would rather leave it not coloured than add that colour. And obviously if I was doing this at home, outside of class time, I might add a background colour and I'd colour in his sweater. But yeah, I was trying to get the face done in the time that we have. So, but you can definitely do more things with it if you want to at this point. But I'm really happy with that. Like it a lot. So I'll see you next week with ballpoint pens, and I'll post a picture. I'll post the photo that we'll be drawing on Mighty Networks in the next few days. So let me stop recording. There we are.